Tammy.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Metropolitan Planning Organization meeting. We will do a combination like we always do, taking action on the minutes, but also doing a roll call. Could I have a motion to accept the minutes from August 22nd?
So moved, was that, and Ed?
Yeah,
Ed
And Arthur
LaPointe
seconded.
and Arthur
Okay,
seconded.
and are there any corrections or omissions? Okay, not hearing anyone wish to speak, either calling in or in person. Sylvia, do you want to go ahead with the roll call and the approval of
I
minutes?
do. From Bedford in-house, we have Bill Jean.
I didn't abstain.
Thank you. And online, we have Brian Lord.
Hi, everybody. I had to leave early, so I guess formally I should abstain as well. Thanks.
From Chester, we have Andrew Haddock in-house
Present, yes.
and Deb Munson.
Present and yes.
From Derry in-house, we have Jeff Moulton
Here and yes.
and Richard Tripp.
Here and yes.
From Francistown in-house, we have Gary Schneckenberg
Present and abstain.
and Alfred Eisenberg online.
Here and yes.
Thanks, Al. Goffstown in-house, we have Barbara Griffin.
Here abstain.
From Hooksett, we have Denise Pitchett Folk.
Present, abstain.
Thank you. From Londonderry, we have Suzanne Brunel in-house
Present and yes.
and Arthur Rugg.
I'm present and yes on the minutes.
Excellent. In Manchester, we have Marcus Ponce de Leon.
Present and yes.
And New Boston, Mark Sunan.
Here and yes.
And Wyndham, both in-house, we have Peter Griffin, our chair,
Here and yes.
and Ed LaPointe.
Yeah, here and yes.
And also, MPO member online, we have William Rose from DOT.
Yeah, present and I'll abstain.
The mountain has spoken.
Okay, Sylvia, do we have any old business?
No, I believe not.
Okay. First item of new business, Nate will be presenting the fiscal year 25-34 10-year transportation plan.
Uh-oh, lost our video. Well, that's good because we're not gonna need it anyway for a little while.
Hold on, let's see if can people see? Let's check in with people if they can see.
You can see the PowerPoint in full
Okay.
screen now.
Okay, good. PowerPoint in full screen. This is a success.
That's
So-
success.
All right, so, well, good morning, everyone. I wanted to walk through this morning, just a review of the newly released draft fiscal year 2025 to 2034 10-year plan. I show this slide regularly because we talk about so many different transportation plans and programs in our office. We have our long-range plan that goes out 20 years, which we call the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. We have our short-range plan, which we call the TIP, which you're all familiar with the TIP adoption and TIP amendments. That's a 4-year program of projects that's headed towards construction. In a lot of states, that's all they have. Things go from the long-range plan to the TIP. But New Hampshire is different, and we have a state requirement to do a mid-range plan called the 10-year plan. And what makes the 10-year plan notable is that once something enters the 10-year plan, it's essentially a state-level funding commitment to bring that project to fruition. So there's a threshold when a project moves from the Metropolitan Transportation Plan into the 10-year plan. It constitutes that commitment of funding to bring that project to construction. So we update the 10-year plan every 2 years in concert with our colleagues at other regional planning commissions and of course, New Hampshire DOT. The draft 2025 to 2034 10-year plan was released earlier this month, about 2.5 weeks ago now, I think. It does reflect the increased funding levels that we're expecting through formula funding as a result of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, what we call the IIJA. The IIJA is sometimes referred to as the bipartisan infrastructure law or bill. They're the same thing, same legislation. I'm just used to calling it the IIJA. So the IIJA is bringing more funding, federal funding for transportation into New Hampshire and every other state in the union for that matter. But those funding increases are increasingly being offset by rising project costs due to inflation. So we have these projects require labor and materials. Labor shortages are affecting the construction industry and the contractors that are actually constructing these projects. And inflation is also affecting the cost of materials that go into these projects. So yes, there's more revenue, but project costs are notably higher due to those inflationary factors. The inflation assumption that DOT is using in this 10-year plan is now 3.7% per year. That's up almost a full percentage point from the last 10-year plan. So you see the inflation being incorporated into the financial constraint calculations of the 10-year plan. You may remember that in March of 2023, we culminated our regional process for this 10-year plan by adopting a set of regional priorities for inclusion in the draft 10-year plan. The top three of those priorities being updating the New Hampshire Route 101 corridor study, engineering study in Bedford. The second being improvements to Exit 8 and Wellington Road interchange in Manchester. And the third being the conversion of Route 107, Candia Road and Church Street in Deerfield to a roundabout. All three of those priority projects are included in this draft 10-year plan. I have notes here in the text about what their project numbers are and how much they're programmed for, but essentially this is exactly what we were expecting. The process is working well. The priorities that we submitted to DOT were fiscally constrained, and they have included them in the draft 10-year plan accordingly. So things are working really smoothly and well with the partnership between the regional planning commissions and New Hampshire DOT in the 10-year plan. I want to note a few other new projects that are appearing for the first time in this 10-year plan. As a result of statewide programs, there are three that are coming into the 10-year plan through the State Aid Bridge Program. Those being a local bridge, the old Deerfield Road Bridge in Candia, Blake's Hill Road Bridge in Deerfield, and the Stokes Hill Road Bridge in Londonderry. These are all projects that would have been initiated through conversations between the town and New Hampshire DOT related to local bridge aid through the State Aid Bridge Program. So all of those are newly appearing for the first time in this 10-year plan. A couple of other notable projects that are appearing for the first time in the 10-year plan. There's one in Manchester that you'll see listed as Sheffield Road Intersection Safety Improvements. That is a child project of the Highway Safety Improvement Program. It came out of a road safety audit that Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, the City of Manchester, and DOT coordinated on last year. So that is programmed for construction in fiscal year 2025, those improvements on Sheffield Road. The statewide project that has come in and out of the draft 10-year plan for the last few cycles is once again in this draft 10-year plan. That is the exit sign renumbering. If you're not familiar, there is a federal manual on uniform traffic control devices requirement that interstate exit signage be milepost based. New Hampshire does not have milepost based interstate signage. I think we're maybe the last or second to last state that doesn't have it. So New Hampshire DOT includes this project and has included it in each of the last few 10-year plans for consideration. It has been removed in the previous couple of 10-year plan cycles. It may very well be removed again this time. We'll see what happens through that discussion. But I thought it was notable to mention the inclusion of that project in the draft 10-year plan. And a project in Windham is reappearing in the 10-year plan. We last saw this project in the fiscal 19 to 28 10-year plan. It is a corridor engineering study of Route 111 in the town of Windham, and building upon the corridor study that was completed there about 10 years ago, 12 years ago now. and moving towards a preferred design alternative to bring to construction in a future 10-year plan. You may also remember that back in the early part of the year, here in 2023, we had the statewide CMAQ solicitation, what we call the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, CMAQ for short. That solicitation occurred statewide. You may recall that New Hampshire DOT recommended including all of the non-EV projects statewide in the draft 10-year plan, and then continuing to research and find EV related funding sources for those EV projects. So again, they recommended including all of the non-EV projects in the draft 10-year plan. There were 4 of those non-EV projects in our region. Town of Bedford, 3,800 feet of sidewalk on Old Bedford Road. In the town of Londonderry, the construction of phase 7 of the Londonderry Rail Trail, the final phase of the rail trail in Londonderry. In the city of Manchester, a series of improvements on the Mammoth Road corridor, including signal optimization and filling some gaps in the sidewalk network, as well as intersection improvements. And then a project sponsored by the New Hampshire DOT's Traffic Bureau to do signal optimization on 3 different corridors, 2 of which are in our region, 102 in Londonderry and Route 111 in Windham. So those were the CMAQ projects that were recommended for inclusion in the draft 10-year plan. None of those projects are currently in the draft 10-year plan. So even though they were recommended, they are not currently included. None of the CMAQ projects are currently included in the actual 10-year plan draft document. That is because members of the Executive Council wanted additional time to review and consider the CMAQ projects around the state before formally endorsing their inclusion in the plan. So if you are in one of those communities that has one of those affected CMAQ projects, specifically Bedford, Londonderry, Manchester, and Windham, you may want to participate in or provide comments via the GASSET process. So that your executive counselor understands the importance of that project within your community. And again, the 4 projects in question here are 3,800 feet of sidewalk on Old Bedford Road, phase 7 of the Londonderry Rail Trail, Mammoth Road improvements in Manchester, and traffic signal optimization on 102 in Londonderry and 111 in Windham. Turnpike project considerations. COVID has affected the travel patterns. Still, we are still seeing the effects of the COVID related traffic pattern changes. And that has changed the traffic on the turnpike system. And the traffic on the turnpike system is what generates toll revenue to support the turnpike system. And so the toll revenue models for the turnpike system are continuing to present some fiscal constraint concerns. And in New Hampshire, the turnpike system is supposed to be run as an enterprise. It's supposed to be self-sustaining based on the toll revenue that it generates. And we're not supposed to be supplementing toll revenue with federal funds or other sources of funding to make turnpike projects happen. So with that in mind, as a result of those constraint considerations with toll revenue models, we are seeing delays in this 10-year plan for a series of turnpike projects in the region. The first of which is the Bedford Merrimack 16100 project. That is the conversion of the Bedford Mainline Toll Plaza on the F.E. Everett Turnpike to all electronic tolling. That project we anticipated going to construction this year, actually, or 2024, and it's going to be delayed now to 2025, 2026. The exit 6 and 7 reconstruction projects in Manchester. Exit 7 is now delayed until fiscal 2032, and exit 6 is now delayed until fiscal 2034. So there were delays in the last 10-year plan to those 2 projects, and there are more delays in this 10-year plan, unfortunately, related to those 2 projects. Lastly, work is underway on the F.E. Everett Turnpike expansion from Bedford to exit 8 in Nashua. You can see the construction happening on the northern part of that project right now. Those toll revenue model challenges have affected this project as well. This project's underway. but now the completion of construction is extended by about 3 years. I think it was supposed to be complete in 2028. And now one of the final elements of that project in the town of Merrimack is not expected to be completed until 2031 now. A few other project highlights for some of the key regional projects in the 10-year plan. Bedford 40664. This is the Route 3 widening from Hawthorne Drive to Ray Wazorek Drive. We are seeing a 1-year delay in construction, the start of construction for that project. In part, that's because this 10-year plan includes a funding increase of about $1.5 million to account for inflationary considerations with that project. So that is likely one of the factors why that project is going to be delayed a year. The Londonderry Exit 4A project, obviously construction is underway on that project. It will be completed in phases. This 10-year plan has the completion of that project scheduled for 2027. In Hooksett, the widening of Route 3 from Route 27 to Alice Avenue, construction is getting delayed a bit to now start in 2027. But the engineering process is well underway there. They're still working to develop the preferred design alternative. They've had public meetings with town officials and members of the public and abutters. So the engineering process is moving forward there. But based on where they're at in the schedule right now, it looks like construction is going to start in 2027 for that project. Londonderry, the intersection of Route 28 and 128, which we added supplemental funding to in the last round, is getting a little bit more supplemental funding in this round, about an additional $850,000, mostly due to inflationary factors. And like the Bedford project, that project is being delayed 1 year to start 2028. We've been talking about construction delays. There is a construction advancement in Manchester. It's the roundabout at River Road and Bicentennial Drive at the entrance to Derryfield School. If you're familiar with that area in Manchester, construction, I think in this current 10-year plan was for 2027. That's being advanced to 2025 in this 10-year plan. Likely based on, that's a locally managed project, and that advancement is likely based on the readiness of that project to move forward. Debt service is included in this 10-year plan. Again, for Interstate 93 capacity improvements, that project was completed a couple of years ago now, but the debt service continues, and it continues through the horizon of this 10-year plan through fiscal 2034. Lastly, in Ware, it's project 14338. It's had a couple of different lives. It's an old project number, so it's been around for a long time. I believe it was a different bridge previously, but it is now the replacement of the River Road Bridge over the Piscataquag River in Ware. And that looks like it's moving forward towards construction in fiscal 25 and 26. On the transit side of things, I would note that the 10-year plan does include all of the expected FTA funding for both Manchester Transit Authority and CART services in the region, so there are no surprises there. The 10-year plan programs exactly what we expect for transit services in the region. I would like to tip my cap to New Hampshire DOT. They've done good work with the regional coordinating councils around the state, including Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. We've deployed a network statewide of 1 statewide and 8 regional mobility managers to help develop and implement community transportation services, particularly targeted towards the elderly and disabled. Ben Herbert in our office, if you've met Ben, is the regional mobility manager for our region. Lastly, I would note that the new state budget, the fiscal 24-25 state budget, did include $2.3 million in state level operating support for public transit services. That is up from about $400,000 in the previous budget. So about a $1.9 million increase in state operating support for transit. And that's going to go a long way to help the transit providers match and leverage the federal dollars that are available to them to deploy more service in our region and around the state. The primary means of providing feedback on the draft 10-year plan. And again, this is a draft. Nothing is final here. There are a series of public hearings happening around the state as we speak, hosted by the Governor's Advisory Commission on Intermodal Transportation, what we call GASSET. GASSET is comprised of the 5 executive counselors and the Commissioner of Transportation. And I believe the commissioner is now a non-voting member. So essentially the voting members of GASSET are the executive counselors. There are about 24 hearings around the state. 2 of those are going to be in our region. Tomorrow night at 7 p.m. in the Londonderry Town Office in the Town Council Chambers is the first hearing in our region. And then the very last hearing in the state will be in our region as well, October 25th at 7 p.m. In Goffstown at fire station number 18. I did include a link here to the GASSET schedule. Essentially, if you go to Google and type in New Hampshire DOT 10-year plan, their 10-year plan page is going to be the first thing that the first link that appears. If you click on that, you'll be able to download and review the entire draft 10-year plan as well as the full GASSET hearing schedule. For our 2 hearings in the region, Councilor Gatsis will be presiding over both of those hearings. Councilor Stevens does represent the town of Derry and a corner of our region. I don't know if Councilor Stevens intends to attend the one in Londonderry or not, but Councilor Gatsis will be presiding over both. New Hampshire DOT, as part of the 10-year plan process, does have an online survey that they are encouraging people to take and share their thoughts about their view of transportation priorities in the state to help inform the 10-year plan update and future 10-year plan updates. We would certainly encourage any of you here today to take that survey or feel free to spread the word about the survey within your communities. You can find that survey link on the DOT's 10-year plan website. Again, if you just Google New Hampshire DOT 10-year plan, I think this link is at the very top of that 10-year plan page. So please encourage you to take the survey and share it with others. Lastly, if you cannot attend the GASSET hearings in person and still want to share your thoughts, New Hampshire DOT does welcome written comments on the draft 10-year plan. Those comments can be submitted to Bill Watson, who is the administrator of the DOT's Bureau of Planning and Community Assistance. You can mail him at the address on the screen. You can also email him and he will accept electronic written comments at william.e.watsonjr@dot.nh.gov. DOT does ask that any written comments on the draft 10-year plan be submitted by November 3rd. So if you are so inclined, please feel free to send your written comments to Bill Watson. With that, before I take any questions, I'll yield to my colleague, William Rose. I'll put him on the spot. William, from DOT, is there anything else that I didn't mention that you would like to mention and plug to the group today about the 10-year plan?
I think you covered it all, Nate.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Questions for Nate from in-house? Yes, please.
And Nate, do you know on the Route 3 expansion in Bedford from Hawthorne to Ray Reserve Drive, is that design and engineering still proceeding or is that delayed as well?
It is. My understanding is they've selected an engineering firm and that kind of the initial work is underway for that. Yeah, thank you.
Additional question? Yes, please.
On the CMAQ funding from where the executive council hasn't approved it, you know what the concern is? Is it the actual projects themselves or the source of funding?
I wasn't there at the meeting, so I only heard kind of secondhand about what the discussion was. I do not believe Councilor Gatsis was at the hearing or at the meeting where this decision was made, so this may not be Councilor Gatsis's perspective. But a couple of the councilors, as I understand it, wanted to review the projects in more detail before they were willing to bless the entire package. So there may be councilors that are doing homework on certain projects within their respective districts. I don't know if there were 1 or 2 projects in particular that caught somebody's eye. But as far as I know, it wasn't Counselor Gatsa specifically raising that concern.
Nate, could it be also too, they try to look to make sure that each of their districts have a fair share of CMAQ money?
It could always be a
Yeah.
consideration. I don't know that specifically, but that could always be a consideration.
Additional questions in-house? Questions from those calling in? Any questions from those calling in? Okay, thank you. Nate, I do have a question.
Sure.
The infrastructure money is a once in a lifetime thing. Has there been any discussion beyond when these monies are no longer available? What the dynamic might be on transportation in New Hampshire?
I think there are 3 more years of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act legislation.
I think
So
it's
we do have
2025.
some certainty, at least for a 3-year period.
Mhm.
At that point, Congress will go into their deliberations about a reauthorization of that bill. And we'll see what happens from there. Who knows what the landscape will look like 3 years from now when they're discussing that. But I think there's reasonable optimism that the funding levels that exist today will stay at least at these levels in the future beyond the IIJA. But I don't remember any time in my career where Congress has reduced the transportation funding levels in a reauthorization.
Okay.
Should we hit allow? Will that bring our stuff back?
Okay, Sylvia, do we have any other business for the MPO?
Try to fix the camera.
Yeah, can you?
Just at least turn on the webcam.
Oh. All right. Okay. There I am.
That's the only one that's registered right now.
All right, we're ready.
Sylvia, do we have any other business for the MPO?
No, we're all set. Thank you.
I see Jacob LaFontaine's name up there. I'd like to congratulate Jacob. He was profiled in a newspaper in the Salem, northern Massachusetts area. Jacob is the almost new planner for the town of Salem. And he's also representative on this board from the town of Goffstown. So congratulations, Jacob.
Well, thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, could I have a motion to adjourn, please? Motion and second, okay.
Who made the motion? Marcus and Jeff.
All those in favor? It's unanimous. Okay. Call to action, the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission meeting. Could I have action of minutes on August 22nd?
I'll move the minutes until August 22nd.
Sylvia, do you want to, are there any corrections or omissions? No, okay. Sylvia, do you want to go
All
ahead?
right. And did you get that, Cam?
Yes.
Okay. So we have Bill Jean from Bedford, Brian Lord from Bedford.
Present, abstain, please. Thanks.
Chester, we have Andrew Haddock
President, yes.
and Deb Munson.
Present and yes.
From Derry, Jeff Moulton
Here and yes.
and Richard Tripp.
Here and yes.
Francistown, Gary Schneckenberg
President.
and Al Eisenberg.
Present and yes.
From Goffstown, Barbara Griffin and Jacob LaFontaine.
Present and yes.
We've got from Hooksett, Denise Pitchett Folk.
Present, abstain.
From Londonderry, Suzanne Brunel
Present and yes.
and Arthur Rugg.
I'm present and yes on the minutes.
From Manchester, we have Marcus Ponce de Leon.
President, yes.
From New Boston, Mark Sunan.
President, here and yes.
From Wyndham, Peter Griffin
President, yes.
and Ed Lapointe.
Okay. First item, Sylvia, it's you, the fiscal 2025 membership years.
All right, this should not take long. As in since 2019, we have recommended and the budget committee agreed with us to keep our dues rate flat at $0.676 per capita. And we apply that rate to the most recent 2022 population estimates provided by New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs. In your packet, you've gotten that, the table that Nate put together. And basically it's some communities have, well, two communities, Ware and Derry, their population have gone down, and then every other community it's gone up either very minimally, like in Goffstown, and then a bit more in Hooksett and Londonderry are actually the ones that went up the most. So that's it.
Questions for Sylvia in-house? Questions for Sylvia for those calling in? Okay. Could I have a motion to adopt the fiscal 25 Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission membership dues?
So moved.
And is there a second? Several seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hands.
And that was Gary.
And yes, from those calling in. Are there any,
Brian Lord has his, they're just raising their hand, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
any in opposition? Please raise your hand or voice. Any abstentions? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.
Next item, Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, CEDS program. Cameron will be presenting that.
See the mouse on here? I don't think it's my mouse. Thank you, Marcus. One second, folks.
Very strange.
Here we go. Okay. I know we have a guest speaker, so I don't want to take up too much time here. This is an information only presentation. By the way, my name is Cam Prolman, regional planner with the commission. And I wanted to give an update about the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, otherwise known as the CEDS. And specifically what I'm going to be talking about today is some work we've been doing over the past year to update the project list. So this kind of stems from a New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs, or a New Hampshire BEA, with their initiative to better support and connect with regional economic development stakeholders across the state. That is, they were calling the Cooperative Economic Development Region, or CEDRs. And there's several CEDRs across the state. And RPCs are typically the ones who are kind of organizing those CEDR meetings. And but that's important because through that CEDR program, through BEA, Central New Hampshire Planning Commission and the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission were able to receive a little bit of funding to help update our CEDS project list.
And so you're probably asking, what is the CEDS? It's been a long time since I've talked about the CEDS in front of the commission. A CEDS is a comprehensive economic development strategy. Basically, it's a roadmap or action plan for regional economic development. The most important thing in the CEDS is a project list. The project list, as well as the goals and objectives. The benefits of having a CEDS, it identifies regional industry clusters. We assess the region's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we help make the case for funding regional projects. That's probably the most important part of the CEDS. And also we engage in collaboration between communities, not only in our region, but in the Central Planning Commission region as well. I do also want to note that a CEDS is important because it's a prerequisite for becoming an economic development district. So in our region, there's only one economic development district that is, and I'm blanking, REDC, and they're based over in Raymond, I believe. And so they have a couple communities that are in our region that's part of their economic development district. That district, being in an EDD opens up opportunities for EDA funding that would otherwise be pretty difficult to compete to access those funds. So what we're trying to do through the CEDS, and I'll show you our region on the next slide, is our vision is to create an economic development district to hopefully open up more competitive opportunities for EDA funding. So in our CEDS region, there's 26 municipalities and 2 counties, 21 towns in Merrimack County, 5 towns in Hillsborough. There's 6 towns and 1 city from our region. And the plan was last updated in 2019. That was a full CEDS plan update, and it's next due for an update in 2024. So this past year, we brought together the CEDS strategy committee that's made up of economic development leaders, public officials, municipal staff, and different representatives of land use boards and economic development committees. We can see some familiar faces on this picture. Who am I seeing? I'm seeing Becky Hebert of Bedford, Bruce Thomas of Hooksett, Kristen Clark of the city of Manchester, David Pierce of Goffstown, Jonathan Goldman, Manchester, and Carol of New Boston, and Nicholas Williams of Hooksett, Andre. Anyway, it's a good mix of folks. We got together via Zoom and had, I think we had 3 or 4 meetings talking about this project list update. And so, like I said, this was not a full CEDS plan update, just a project list. We felt like it would be a good opportunity to get an update from communities on kind of their priority projects for economic development. And so we worked with that, the larger group and municipalities to nominate economic development projects. We then brought together a project selection subcommittee who reviewed 60 project nomination forms. And from our region, from Goffstown, David Pierce sat on the selection subcommittee. So I do want to publicly thank David for his volunteer time. We did have 3 meetings, pretty long meetings reviewing all these projects. So it was very nice of him to volunteer. So the updated CEDS project list includes economic development projects ranging from strategic sewer and water infrastructure expansions to transportation infrastructure that will enable business development and job growth if they were to be funded. So I'm going to give a pretty high level overview of the projects that were submitted this time around. I'm not going to go in depth into each one of these, but I will say the project list will be available on our website for those who want to look into them, and please reach out to me if you have any questions. So in Bedford, they nominated several projects ranging from corridor studies to their EV storage and EV charging, municipal facility expansions, road improvements, hooks it. We have the two exit 10, exit 11 projects. Their sewer infrastructure project. In Goffstown, for their new project that they nominated was a pedestrian bridge over the Piscataqua River. And then we had 3 projects remain from the last set. So high pressure gas line, a feasibility study for municipal sewer and water, and a cooperative water drive extension. In Manchester, we saw several new project nominations with ranging from pedestrian infrastructure, traffic signal improvements, other pedestrian infrastructure improvements. Their Campbell Street roadway and signal reconfiguration. And we also, that's kind of dropped down, that we wanted to keep in the SEDS were the exit 6 and 7 improvements, passenger rail. So one thing to think about with the SEDS is that this doesn't guarantee funding for anything. If anything, it documents project support in different ways, which we do in many different ways as a MPO, as a commission. We like to make sure we're documenting our municipalities' priorities. So, and then where there's a River Road construction project, I think Nate just spoke to the bridge on River Road upgrade that's in the 10-year plan. So where's, you know, trying to put their eggs in different baskets. So the next step, I will be coming to the October commission meeting and I will be asking that the commission adopts the updated SEDS project list. And then on our end, the next step is for us, Central and EDA, to update the full SEDS in the next couple of years and really seek a designation for an economic development district. So that's all I had. It's information only. Please reach out if you have any questions. Yeah, thank you.
Questions for Kim? Barbara?
Thank you. Kim, when you were going through this, and I apologize because I forget the last SEDS plan.
Yeah.
When you were discussing this in the working group, how was the economic impact of the projects addressed by the group? And I say this because I am adamantly opposed to one in Goffstown.
Okay.
So that's why I'm.
I will be honest, it was a very subjective process as far as identifying that economic impact. I do have the notes and the spreadsheets for the project rankings. You'll see that one pedestrian project may have scored really high and another not so much, and that was because of a consensus discussion that was happening during those ranking meetings. But so in short, what we looked at was regional economic impact. And then we looked at project readiness and feasibility as well.
And the reason I bring this up is, and I know this SEDS is really, it really isn't a guarantee of anything, but I think including some of the projects that are on that does a disservice to it, because it is hard to equate from an economic development standpoint the value of some of those projects.
Yeah.
And that's sort of my comment on it. It just becomes another wish list for what communities do. So
yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think the reality of having a project in the SEDS is, if a municipality is ready to go on a project, they're going to put forth the effort to go for funding. For example, you know, some of the Manchester projects, some of the Bedford projects that have already had engineering done and that are in the SEDS, you know, those projects are more likely to move forward. So while I can see the point that some of these are kind of like a wish list.
well, not only a wish list, but the benefit is very specific to the community and even to the population within that community. And
yeah,
it's
so
pretty for a lot of communities, not just Goffstown. And that's my point, is that we run this balancing act between community wish lists and regional impact. And I think you diffuse the impact of the regional positions when you include things that are local projects that would normally be included in local budgets and really have no impact outside of the community. And you don't really need to respond to that,
Okay.
but
We do rank them and you will
yeah, but
see
you're
that.
not ranking them by virtue of a dollar quantification. It's as a base of a subjective conversation.
Barbara, thank you. I would like to
I'm
allow
sorry.
other people to, and
Zero.
Cam will be available after the meeting to continue.
Yeah, we can.
Are there any additional questions within the room? Are there additional questions of the individuals calling in? I don't see anyone. Cam, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next item is the development of New Hampshire's digital equity plan. We have joint speakers, Robert McLaughlin, Executive Director, National Cooperative for Digital Equity, and Charlie French, Department Head, Community and Economic Development, UNH Cooperative Extension. Gentlemen, welcome.
So I just, Charlie, I just made you co-host. I'm not seeing Bob yet.
Yeah, I don't see Bob either, so I'm happy to pitch in for him. I certainly can't be as eloquent as Bob is about the digital equity plan, but I can do my best. And maybe I have two colleagues from Extension, Scott Slattery and Mike Polazzotti, who are also joining us. So
Wonderful. Well, I've just admitted Robert, so.
oh, there we go. That makes me feel better. So,
That's good. And just FYI, Charlie, I think if you can get as close to your speaker as possible, it's a little bit hard to hear you.
okay.
Thank you. Yeah, if you're close, we can hear you. Hi, Robert. So I'm just gonna introduce both Robert and Charlie. Recently, we were contacted by this dynamic team. We know that there are a lot of issues with digital access and accessibility and equity. And so without me talking a whole lot about it, we're just really lucky that this program is starting. It's a statewide program. There are a lot of different outreach efforts happening across the state, and I'm sure that Bob and Charlie will tell us all about it. But and I'm gonna make Robert make you also a co-host, so you guys can take over, start us off.
So Charlie, you want to start us off, or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, no, I can give a little bit of a context and overview, but Bob, you're so eloquent in describing the digital equity planning purpose, context, and function. So I'll just give a context that the state of New Hampshire's Department of Business and Economic Affairs had put out an RFP back probably late spring for contractors to develop the state's digital equity plan. And the idea is to be able to connect, it's a plan that guides federal resources to be able to connect people with not just broadband internet, but with digital devices and the host of digital services and technologies that are made available through the internet and such. We put in an application to draft the plan, and we were awarded that by the state. And we have been engaging diverse constituents across the state of New Hampshire for the past, well, actually, we started before we even got the contract for the plan. But we've engaged, over 1,000 people, I think, in the state through a variety of venues so far. But Bob, I'd love to turn it over to you to talk about the digital equity plan itself and the purpose and importance of it.
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. And Sylvia, thanks for this opportunity. So under the infrastructure bill, there's the Digital Equity Act, Sylvia, as you know, and this is an act that has different flavors of funding barreling towards New Hampshire and other states around broadband mapping, which is where is broadband, where isn't it? Broadband investment, which is to bring broadband where it isn't and to speed it up where it is, and so on. And then there's digital equity planning money, which is what Charlie and I and his colleagues at UNH Extension and ours at NCDE and Colin Rhinesmith and his colleagues at the Digital Equity Research Center. We've got one of these 48-second, planning contracts to race to put together New Hampshire's plan. And good news is that we baked in some mechanisms which we hope to brainstorm with you about that will allow you to go well beyond a one-shot listening thing, to really oversee and help shape this soft clay over the next 4.5 years and make sure it has maximum impact in ways that matter to you in the Southern New Hampshire region. So under the Digital Equity Act, there are 5 metrics, 5 required needles that a state plan is supposed to address. One is access to affordable broadband. Excuse me. The next is access to computers and tech support, which is bundled together as their second metric. So access to devices and tech support to use those safely and effectively. Thirdly is digital literacy skill development supports. The fourth is cyber safety skill development support. And the fifth is access to websites that provide information on public services and resources in ways that are accessible for those with disabilities and with language barriers. And so and as if that's not multifaceted enough, the Digital Equity Act, very rightly, we believe, says digital equity is great, but if that's all a state plan addresses, so what? If it doesn't address poverty, that's very much the bias as well of the Digital Equity Act. They require states to talk about digital equity in conjunction with 5 dimensions of inclusion. You'll appreciate. One is economic opportunity. Another is educational. Third is healthcare access. Fourth is civic engagement, and fifth is housing. So what Charlie and I knew back in last November, we were worried that there wouldn't be enough time to do all the listening that was needed. Turns out, oh my, were we right? And so we began, as Charlie was saying, we did some pro bono listening sessions in the winter and spring, recorded those, made those publicly available to anybody who wanted to vie for the planning contract, so it wouldn't bias the state agency. Sorry, this is my dog's barking because Amazon's going by in the background, if you're wondering about that barking sound. And so what we proposed is that in each of 9 regional planning regions, so for example, Southern New Hampshire, of course, your region, and then, the map of all the regions in the state, what we proposed from the beginning, knowing that there wasn't going to be enough time for listening, and thank heavens we took this approach. We said, let's bake into the DNA of New Hampshire's approach to this funding that there's going to be a regional coalition in each of the 9 regions comprised of 2 different kinds of stakeholder groups. They're going to be those that represent different, what in the Digital Equity Act are called covered populations. And I'll put that in the chat. And when it goes to somebody else to talk, I'll lay out which those 8 are. It's English learners, veterans, seniors, rural, low-income persons of color. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple, and I'll put them in the chat. So we want a regional coalition, each of the required stakeholders to have a say on how your part of the state rolls out its share of funding, how you spend that money, it's your budget. And then secondly, we wanted to have a leader in inclusion in each of the 5 inclusion dimensions in those regions. So for example, the community college, Nashua, and higher ed and workforce development and libraries and other stakeholders that can bring assets to the table to help you implement your plan. And so what we proposed is that roughly about $200,000 per year for the next 4 years would be deployed by each region's coalition at your direction. And then the balance of the roughly $5 million a year to New Hampshire would go for statewide priorities that are identified by an 18-member board comprised of 2 representatives from each of the 9 regions. So we said, let's make this really transparent. Let's make sure that you own this, because these are literally your tax dollars at work. Now, in this context, in talking with Sylvia and colleagues across the State Association of Regional Planning Commissions, we were saying, hey, we would love to work with the RPCs. We're not suggesting to create a new committee if you've already got one that will serve that purpose. And so that really leads to this morning's conversation. Did I do that okay, Charlie and Sylvia? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And Bob, I just wanted to reinforce a couple of things that you said. And one is that a primary outcome of the state's digital equity plan is really about, it's about economic opportunity. And it's really enabling underserved individuals, those covered populations, which include ethnic, racial minorities, English language learners, low-income residents, people with disabilities, seniors, veterans, rural residents. It's really about enabling them opportunity to access digital resources that will better enable them to get into the workforce, help have the skills that they will need in today's digital world to to meet some of those workforce gaps, but also to enhance their financial well-being and livelihood. But it's also about enabling them to access educational services, health services, and a whole host of other services. So it's really about, for me, it comes down to economic opportunity. And it's really for all people in the state. And I guess a couple of other things to mention are that there is a history or a precedent in this regional coalition model. As many of you may recall, a little over a decade ago, after the recession of 2008-9, the regional planning commissions were instrumental in creating broadband coalitions. And those coalitions were really ears to the ground to identify where some of the gaps and needs were with regard to broadband access. And as a result of those coalitions, a lot of the infrastructure has been targeting some of the needs and gaps that were identified by those coalitions. I don't think those coalitions have been active for a while, but they played a really key and instrumental role in addressing broadband gaps over a decade ago. And so we're kind of building off of that model when we think of these having liaisons in each of the regional coalitions, digital equity coalitions, would be important to really, I think for a couple of reasons. One, they're the eyes and the ears to the ground as to what the needs are, but it's also helping the regions to put together viable proposals for how the federal funding can be allocated and utilized. So. Bob, I think I'll turn it back to you to elaborate on anything that might have been.
No, that's all I just want to add amen to that. I mean, we're really, so there is what's already happening in the 48 seconds since we got the contract. And it's very much like the dog that chased the car and found itself, to its astonishment, catching it. It's like a mouthful of bumper. So we're in this, as you'll appreciate, very compressed time frame. And part of the reason for the hurry in developing New Hampshire's draft plan is for a good reason. I think we'll all appreciate that the Department of Commerce wants to commit these funds to New Hampshire now before the November election, so that nobody in Congress can change their minds and claw back any uncommitted funds. So they want to commit these funds to New Hampshire. They've got our name on it as a state, and what we're already seeing. So that's why pressure relief valve, mentioning the regional coalitions and your role continuously in helping to provide oversight and accountability and direction for the soft clay of how the funding in your part of the state and statewide gets deployed. Even though this is going to be a quick conversation now, we know that, please know that there's an on-ramp for you to have continuous influence over how this all evolves. Does that help? And so what we're seeing right now, just really quickly, is really exciting things happening with the public libraries. They're going, oh my, they want to create digital navigators and do training and grow capacity statewide. We've got the adult ed programs that want to grow their capacity statewide. There are a variety. I just was talking this morning with somebody who's involved with senior housing and retirement centers and senior citizen centers who are really excited about capacity building. Telemedicine, one of the things we're saying to folks who care about telemedicine access is there's an opportunity here with this funding to really hit it out of the park, to make really big gains in improving equitable access to telemedicine.
Are you accepting questions now?
Please.
Questions for either gentleman from in-house? Yes, Mark.
So, question, Town of New Boston, what kind of performance measures are you building into?
So at this point, all we know is that the final plan will need those. But we don't want to, so we want to make sure that, and I suspect you'll appreciate this. We want to see what the objectives are of stakeholders that say, we want these things like telemedicine, let's say, or getting everybody signed up for the Affordable Connectivity Program broadband subsidy who's eligible. And then once we know what stakeholders across the state want to see happen, then we'll build performance evaluation measures based on sort of demand driven, if that makes sense. So I'm not trying to finesse that away. We know in fact, the Department of Commerce is going to require that the final plan have those, but we don't want that to wag the dog at this point. We want to find out programmatically, what would you like to see happen first?
Right, and maybe in a general sense, we're guessing that there will be things like, it's easy to measure broadband access and track that data. Maybe, because vocational training is going to be a key one that many of the audiences that we're trying to reach are going to be seeking out more access to vocational training. We can look at numbers in terms of how many people are reached with critical skill building. So those are some examples of things that we may be measuring, but we want to really sort through all the data before we finalize what those measures are.
Additional questions from in the room? Additional questions from those calling in?
I have a quick question,
All right.
Peter.
Go ahead, Sylvia.
I'm wondering, Charlie and Bob, if you might just share your website and show how people might learn something from the website about how they might get involved and that kind of thing.
Sure, we just put in the chat, Sylvia, the link to nhddigitalequity.org. And we're working hard to maintain that and keep that up to date every day. And that has a couple of things that we hope will be helpful per your point, Sylvia. One is links to upcoming events and how to participate, where they are, how to register, that sort of thing, and it's all free. And then secondly, recordings and slideshows of sessions that have already happened. Does that help?
Sure.
Yes, Jeff.
Do we know potentially how much money could be available for this program?
Bob, we've been doing some back of the envelope math. So if we allocate half of the resources to the regional coalitions over the 4-year period, that would be about close to $280,000 that would be available to each of the regional coalitions. And a portion of that, we would love to be able to allocate towards a liaison role, ideally that sits within the Regional Planning Commission, since they have that experience historically. I don't know if on just the digital equity side, we would have enough to cover a full-time position, but one of the proposals that we would like to make in partnership with the BEAD folks who are developing the state's broadband infrastructure plan, which is the sister plan, would be that we would work together to support these liaisons, because you can't disconnect broadband internet from the work that we're doing on the digital equity side. There's a lot of overlap. So we think that if we partner together and write it in both of our plans, there could be enough funding to support a full-time liaison. And then that would still leave over $200,000 per year in each county for projects to support projects on the ground.
And I think it add to that, Charlie, and not to jinx it, but I put in the chat that funding that Charlie just alluded to, BEAD, or Broadband Equity Access and Deployments, one of these long acronym kinds of things. It's another federal pot of money under the Digital Equity Act. It's got 4 priorities. It's parallel to, but overlaps with what we're talking about here. And it could have really good implications for more resources available for digital equity beyond what Charlie just described. We don't know yet, It's supposed to go in the following order of priorities, 4 priorities, this BEAD money. And New Hampshire has gotten 196 million and change allocated as New Hampshire's share. So it's a big pot of money. The first priority goes for broadband where it isn't in New Hampshire. The second is to speed it up where it's there, but it's kind of shaky or slow. The third is to bring broadband to anchor institutions that don't already have it. And then fourthly, whatever's left over, if any, goes for digital equity purposes that we're identifying now this fall. Now, what we've been told ballparkish conservatively, there might be another 10 million or more. There might be nothing left after the broadband priorities for digital equity. But we think what we think is very conservatively, there's going to be another 10 million total over the next 4 years in additional digital equity funding beyond what we're responsible for directly. And that's all going to be money that, again, the regional coalitions and your representatives at the statewide level will control all of that.
Bob, I just wanted to call out a couple of our collaborators on this call. We have Scott Slattery and Mike Polizzati. So one of the things that we're doing in the interim, since the funding won't be available for implementation for roughly a year, we want to spend some time getting these regional coalitions up and running, sort of, structuring what the meetings look like, building membership so that it's broadly representative and such. And so Scott is going to be working with Southern New Hampshire as sort of a liaison for that regional coalition. So Scott, I don't know if you're on the call, but I don't know if you could say a few words about your work with the coalition.
Oh, no, thank you, Charlie. I do appreciate it, Bob. Yeah, Sylvia, I know I had sent you an email a few days ago. Charlie had asked me to send that over to you. Love to set up a time to chat some more about these regional coalitions. Certainly nothing that we need to do right away, but sooner rather than later, and get that going. I'm also going to be liaising with the Nashua Regional Planning Commission as well. And then I'll turn it over to Mike. I know that he's doing some liaison work too.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I'm Mike Polizzati. I am going to be focusing, I work mainly in Merrimack County, but I'll be focusing on working with the Central New Hampshire RPC, doing a lot of the same work that Scott mentioned and that Charlie and Bob talked a bit about too.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sylvia, any closing comments?
No, just want to thank everybody for coming today and giving us a snapshot of this project. And Scott, now that I know you're a real person and not another scam, I will.
Sylvia, you and I crossed paths in Goffstown a few months ago at one of the Economic Development Committee meetings.
Oh, funny. Okay, there you go. It's a small world. But anyway, thank you so much for coming and sharing today, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your participation.
That's about it for today.
Well, and thank you for calling us gentlemen.
Thank you.
Take it where you can get it.
Exactly.
Sylvia, do we have other business / you want to talk about the annual meeting at all?
Good success. I think everyone had a great time, great panel. Yeah, not a whole lot to say.
Great weather.
We did have good weather. The IT worked really well.
We had fireworks too. Yeah.
We had fireworks.
Outside, the lightning.
Lightning every.
Oh, yes, we did have lightning.
It was a lightning storm that was in progress from beginning to end.
Yeah, but we left. I don't think it was pouring when we left.
No,
We were lucky. Yeah, I know.
Any additional other business, Sylvia?
Oh.
Any questions or is there public comment period? Any public people? No. Commissioner insights. Now's your chance, commissioners. Fire away. Insights? Barbara, no insights? None. Okay, with anyone calling in that has insights or other comments? Okay, thank you all so much for participating. It was a good meeting and I appreciate you turning out. Could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second. Okay, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you all.
We're getting out early, Barbara.
I know,
I'm
right here.
I'm making up for lost time in the last meeting or two.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry I missed it. I was flying home. I ended up in Boston at 1 o'clock in the morning instead of Manchester at 8 p.m.
Stay here. No, let's go.
Because it takes a really long time to fly between the two. Good